The summer sun burned down on the small frontier town, and the dusty streets seemed to glow with heat. Horses snorted as they waited outside the saloon. Flies buzzed around the market stalls, and people moved lazily in the heat of the afternoon. In the middle of all that stood Jack, a young cowboy who worked at a nearby ranch. He was tall, with broad shoulders, worn boots, and a hat that had seen better days. Most people in town thought of him as just another cowboy, rough, tough, and only concerned with his own pride. But deep inside, Jack had a softer heart than most gave him credit for. As Jack leaned against a post near the general store, he noticed an old Apache woman making her way slowly across the street. She carried 2 heavy baskets filled with supplies, her frail arms trembling with the effort. The baskets looked far too heavy for someone her age. Her steps were unsteady, and the heat pressed down on her thin frame. Jack frowned. Most of the townsfolk noticed her too, but instead of helping, they turned away. Some even smirked or muttered under their breath, showing little respect for the old woman because she was Apache. Jack felt a tug in his chest. He knew what it was like to be judged unfairly. As a boy, he had grown up poor, with holes in his boots and hardly enough food to fill his stomach. People had looked down on him too. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing now. The moment he stepped off the wooden walkway, he saw her stumble. One basket slipped from her hand, and she fell hard onto the dusty ground. The baskets tipped over, spilling potatoes and corn onto the street. For a second, the whole place went quiet. Then came the laughter. 2 cowboys outside the saloon slapped their knees, roaring with amusement. A couple of women at the market shook their heads and whispered to each other. Their faces filled not with sympathy but with scorn. Even a young boy pointed and chuckled as if it were some kind of joke. The old woman's face flushed with shame as she tried to push herself up with her trembling hands. Jack's jaw tightened. He couldn't bear the sight. He pushed through the staring crowd and knelt beside her. "Easy, ma'am," he said softly, his voice calm. "Let me help you." The old woman looked up, surprised. Her dark eyes studied him for a brief moment. She said nothing, but Jack gently helped her sit up and dusted off her shoulders. He then reached for the scattered vegetables, picking them up one by one. His hands were rough from years of work, but he handled each item with care, placing them back into the basket. The laughter around him grew louder. "Look at that," one cowboy jeered. "Jack's gone soft. Playing nurse to an old squaw." The crowd chuckled at the insult. Jack felt his ears burn with humiliation. His pride screamed at him to stop, to get up and walk away, but he ignored it. He could see the old woman's pain and knew she needed him more than he needed their approval. When the baskets were filled again, Jack lifted them with ease and offered his arm to the old woman. She hesitated for a moment, perhaps not used to kindness from strangers, especially not from a white cowboy, but slowly she accepted his help, resting her thin hand on his strong arm as he guided her across the street. The townsfolk continued their cruel whispers. "Doesn't he have any pride? Imagine lowering yourself like that. He'll never hear the end of this." Jack held his head down, not out of shame for what he was doing, but to keep from glaring at the people around him. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted the woman safe. When they reached the other side, Jack carefully set the baskets down by the hitching post and stepped back. "There you go," he said quietly. "Are you all right now?" The old woman looked at him for a long moment. Her face was weathered with lines, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were sharp and full of life. She gave a small nod, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "You are different," she said in a low voice, accented but clear. "The others laugh, but you help?" Jack only shrugged, trying to play it off. Didn't seem right, just standing there. She reached into one of her baskets, pulled out a small leather pouch, and held it toward him. "For you," Jack shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. I don't need nothing. Just wanted to help." Her eyes lingered on him as if she were measuring his soul. Finally, she tucked the pouch back into the basket. She gave him another nod, deeper this time, as if she had silently marked him in her memory. Without another word, she picked up her baskets again, surprisingly steady now, and walked away down the street. Jack turned to head back toward the saloon, but the stares followed him. The cowboys leaned back in their chairs, grinning wide. "Didn't know you had such a soft spot, Jack," one of them sneered. "Careful, or folks will start thinking you're one of them." The words cut deep, but Jack kept walking. He wanted to snap back, to defend himself, but what would that change? He knew the truth, he had done the right thing. And even though his pride felt bruised, he couldn't shake the strange look the old woman had given him. That look wasn't pity. It wasn't mockery. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. Later that evening, Jack sat alone at the far end of the saloon, nursing a glass of water while the others laughed, played cards, and boasted about their day. He kept hearing their earlier words, their laughter, their judgment. But stronger than all of that was the memory of the old woman's faint smile. She hadn't thanked him with words. She hadn't tried to flatter him. But her nod, her eyes, those had spoken louder than anything else. And though Jack didn't know it yet, that single act of kindness would change the course of his life forever. The next morning, the sun rose over the ranch where Jack worked. The cattle were already moving restlessly in the pens, and the smell of dust and hay filled the air. Jack tightened the straps on his saddle and prepared his horse for the long day ahead. But as he worked, the words from yesterday still echoed in his mind. The laughter, the pointing fingers, the whispers, none of it had faded. When he rode into town later that day to pick up supplies, the whispers started again. Men leaning against the saloon post tipped their hats with mocking smiles. One spat his tobacco juice into the dirt and chuckled. "Well, if it isn't the Apache's little helper," the man said loud enough for everyone to hear. A group of young cowboys laughed as Jack walked past. He ignored them, keeping his eyes fixed straight ahead. Inside the general store, it wasn't much better. The storekeeper, Mr. Collins, raised an eyebrow as Jack set a list on the counter. "Didn't think I'd see you back so soon," Mr. Collins said. "Heard you were busy carrying baskets yesterday." "That true?" Jack's jaw tightened. "I just helped a woman who fell." Collins smirked as he began filling the order. "That's what they're calling it now, huh? You be careful, Jack. Folks around here don't take kindly to men who go around acting soft. You'll lose your respect quicker than a horse loses shoes on rocky ground." Jack said nothing. He wanted to argue, to tell the man that real respect came from doing the right thing, not from following the crowd. But he knew the words wouldn't change Collins's mind. So he stood quietly while the supplies were packed, then left without another word. As he stepped outside, a boy ran past, shouting to his friends. "There goes the cowboy who bows to old squaws." The boys laughed and ran off, their voices fading into the distance. Jack felt a knot in his chest. It wasn't just grown men mocking him now, it was children too. That evening at the ranch, the teasing continued. Around the campfire, the other cowboys told stories of their day, laughing and boasting. Then one of them turned to Jack. "Hey, Jack," the man called out. "You planning on joining the Apache tribe soon? Maybe they'll give you a new name. How about basket carrier?" The group burst into laughter. Jack forced a small smile and shook his head, but inside it stung. He tried to hide his frustration, poking at the fire with a stick, but his silence only encouraged them more. "Careful," another cowboy added, grinning. "If you keep helping folks like that, the boss might think you're too gentle for this work. Ranch needs tough men, not caretakers." The ranch owner himself, a stern man named Mr. Dawson, was sitting nearby. He didn't laugh, but he did give Jack a long, cold look. "Jack," Dawson finally said, "you're a good worker, but don't forget who you are. People in this town expect cowboys to act a certain way. You go acting different, you'll find yourself alone real quick." The fire cracked and silence followed. Jack looked into the flames, his thoughts heavy. He respected Dawson, but the words felt like another weight pressing down on his shoulders. Was it really wrong to help someone in need? Was kindness truly a weakness? Later that night, as the stars filled the sky and the camp grew quiet, Jack lay awake on his bedroll. The laughter, the mocking words, the disapproving looks, they all swirled in his head. He felt caught between two worlds, one where he wanted to fit in with his fellow cowboys, and another where he wanted to stay true to what he believed was right. The next afternoon, Jack was back in town. He had to pick up some tools for the ranch, but as he tied his horse outside the blacksmith shop, he noticed someone watching him. Across the street stood the old Apache woman he had helped. Her baskets were lighter this time, but she stood tall, her eyes fixed on him. For a moment their gazes met. She gave him a slow nod, the same way she had after he helped her. Then she lifted her hand and motioned for him to come closer. Jack hesitated. He could feel the stares of the townsfolk already. Some leaned out of the saloon windows, curious to see what he would do. A few men chuckled, waiting for him to embarrass himself again. But something in the old woman's eyes drew him forward. He crossed the street and stopped in front of her. "You," she said softly, pointing at him. You are not like the others. Jack scratched the back of his neck, unsure how to answer. I just did what anyone should have done. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. No, not anyone. Both turn away. You did not. She glanced toward the edge of town where the hills rolled into the horizon. Then she looked back at him. Come, she said. Come to my family's camp tonight. Jack blinked. The invitation shocked him. He had never been to an Apache camp before. He knew what the townsfolk would say if they saw him go. They already mocked him enough. Going to her camp would only make things worse. I don't know if that's a good idea, he admitted. People already got plenty to say about me. The old woman tilted her head, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Do you care for their words more than what is right? The question hit him deep. He opened his mouth to respond but found no answer. After a long silence, she nodded once more and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the street. Jack stood there for a long moment, torn between fear and curiosity. He knew if he went to her camp, the ridicule in town would double, but something inside him whispered that her invitation meant more than he understood. It wasn't just a simple gesture of thanks. It was something greater, something that could change his life. That night, as he lay awake again, the decision weighed on him. He could ignore the old woman's invitation, keep his head down, and continue trying to fit in with the other cowboys. Or he could go, risk his pride, and see where the path might lead. The stars above seemed to sparkle brighter, as if urging him toward the unknown. Deep inside, Jack knew the choice was already made. Tomorrow he would ride to the Apache camp. The morning came bright and clear. Jack rose earlier than usual, the sound of cattle and the smell of hay all around him at the ranch. But his mind wasn't on work that day. His thoughts kept circling back to the old Apache woman and her invitation. He tried to push the memory aside, but it clung to him like dust on boots. Finally, after finishing his chores, he saddled his horse and prepared for a ride he knew might change the way people looked at him forever. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. If the ranch hands or Mr. Dawson knew, they would have tried to stop him or at least made cruel jokes about his decision. So Jack kept his mouth shut, mounted his horse, and rode toward the hills that stretched beyond the town. The ride was quiet, the open land rolling out in waves of golden grass and rocky ridges. The further he rode, the fewer signs of town life remained. Soon the laughter, gossip, and judgment of the townsfolk felt like a distant echo. The sun rose higher and a light breeze carried the smell of wild sage and pine as he entered the foothills. By the time he reached the Apache camp, his nerves were on edge. He spotted several conical lodges made from wood and hides, smoke rising from a fire in the center. Men worked nearby, sharpening tools and tending to horses. Women prepared food or cared for children who played at the edge of the camp. The moment Jack appeared, the chatter slowed and many eyes turned toward him. Jack felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't sure if he was welcome, but before he could turn back, the old woman stepped forward from the shade of one of the lodges. She looked smaller here among her family, yet her presence commanded respect. She raised her hand slightly and spoke something in her language. The others paused, then returned to their tasks, though their eyes still lingered on Jack. She approached him with a slow, steady stride. You came, she said. Jack slid off his horse and gave a respectful nod. Yes, ma'am. Figured I owed it to you to at least hear what you had to say. She smiled faintly, then beckoned him to follow her into the camp. Jack tied his horse to a post and walked behind her, feeling dozens of curious eyes on his back. The Apache men kept their distance, watching him with guarded expressions. The women glanced his way too, whispering among themselves. Jack's boots crunched against the dirt, and each step felt heavy under the weight of their judgment. The old woman led him to the fire, where several elders sat in a circle. She gestured for Jack to sit on a blanket laid out for him. Jack hesitated, then lowered himself, resting his hands on his knees. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the air. This is the man I told you about, the old woman said to the others, the one who helped me when I fell. One of the elders, a man with long gray hair and deep lines on his face, studied Jack with sharp eyes. And why did you help her, Cowboy? Most in your town would have stepped over her. Jack cleared his throat, feeling all their gazes pressed down on him. Because it was the right thing to do. She was hurt. I couldn't just stand there. The elder's eyes narrowed, but he nodded slowly, as if testing the truth in Jack's words. Another elder spoke. Do you not fear your own people will turn against you for this? Jack gave a small shrug. They already have. Folks laugh at me, call me weak, but I'd rather they laugh than live knowing I turned my back on someone who needed help. The old woman smiled, her eyes glinting with pride. She looked around the circle. You see? His heart is different. For the next hour, Jack listened as the elders shared stories of their people, tales of survival, honor, and the importance of respect for life. They told him how their tribe had endured hardship, how they valued courage not only in battle but also in compassion. Jack sat quietly, absorbing every word. He realized their values weren't so different from his own, though the townsfolk would never admit it. As the evening came, the old woman invited him to share food with the camp. A meal of roasted venison and beans was passed around. Jack ate beside them, feeling the weight of suspicion slowly begin to lift. A few children even came closer, peeking at him curiously before running off with giggles. After the meal, the old woman stood and placed her hand on Jack's shoulder. She addressed the camp in her language, speaking with passion and conviction. Though Jack couldn't understand the words, he felt their weight. The camp listened in silence, heads nodding in agreement. Finally, she turned back to him. I told them what you did. That you helped me when others mocked. That you stood strong even when your people shamed you. In my eyes, that makes you a man of honor. Jack felt his chest tighten at her words. No one in town had called him honorable. They only saw weakness. But here, among strangers, he felt a kind of respect he had never known before. Still, he remained cautious. I appreciate that, ma'am. But I don't want to cause trouble for you or your people. I know how folks in town think. They wouldn't understand me being here. The old woman shook her head firmly. Let them think what they will. A man is not measured by their laughter. He is measured by his deeds. The fire flickered, and Jack felt those words sink deep into his heart. For the first time in many days, the burden of shame seemed to lift. As the night grew darker, Jack prepared to leave. The old woman walked him back to his horse. Before he mounted, she looked at him with an expression both serious and kind. You have earned something rare, she said. Respect. My people see you now, and I see more in you still. Jack tipped his hat. Thank you, ma'am. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, she replied. Just keep walking the path you know is right. It will take you where you belong. Jack mounted his horse and rode back toward town, the stars guiding his way. The whispers and laughter of the townsfolk still waited for him, but for the first time he didn't feel so small. He had found a place where his actions mattered more than his image, where honor was measured not by pride but by kindness. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The old woman had more in mind for him than he could ever imagine. The next few days passed slowly for Jack, but his heart and mind were restless. Each time he rode into town, he felt the weight of the townsfolk's judgment. Their mocking words still followed him like shadows, yet they seemed lighter now. The memory of the old Apache woman's words, "A man is measured by his deeds," echoed in his mind like a steady drumbeat. It gave him strength even when others sneered. One evening, as the sun began sinking behind the hills, Jack found himself riding once more toward the Apache camp. Something inside him longed to return. The first visit had left an impression deeper than he expected. He wanted to hear more of their stories, to feel again the quiet respect that had surrounded him by the fire. When he reached the camp, children spotted him first. They ran ahead, their laughter ringing through the air, calling out in their language. Soon men and women looked up from their work, surprised to see him return. Some still regarded him with caution, but others nodded slightly in recognition. The old woman appeared again, her steps slow but steady. She greeted him with a smile, warmer this time. You came back, she said. Jack tipped his hat. Yes, ma'am. If I'm welcome. You are welcome, she replied. She gestured toward the fire, where people were gathering for the evening meal. Jack sat among them, sharing food and listening to their songs. He felt more at ease than before. The sharp stares had softened, replaced by curious glances and quiet acceptance. The camp's rhythm was different from the town's. There was no boasting, no cruel laughter. Each person had a role, and each role was respected. After the meal, the old woman stood and raised her hand, signaling for silence. Her voice carried authority, and the people listened closely. She spoke first in her language, her words rising and falling like music. Then she turned to Jack, her eyes shining in the firelight. You have shown honor, she said.
When I fell, you helped.
When others mocked, you did not waver. You came to our camp, though your people would scorn you for it. You are a man who sees with his heart, not just his eyes. Jack shifted uneasily, not used to being praised in such a way. I only did what was right, he said. The old woman's face grew serious. She placed her hand over her chest as though making a promise. For this I must give you something in return. A gift of value, not gold or silver, but life itself. The crowd stirred with whispers. Jack frowned, uncertain of what she meant. Then she lifted her hand and motioned to the edge of the firelight. From the shadows stepped a young woman. Her long dark hair flowed over her shoulders, and her eyes shone like polished amber in the glow of the flames. She moved with quiet grace, her steps soft but confident. The murmurs of the camp grew louder as she came forward, and Jack's breath caught in his throat. This is my daughter, the old woman declared. Her name is Ayanna. She is strong, she is wise, and she is fair of heart. I offer her to you. The words struck Jack like a thunderclap. His eyes widened, and for a moment he could not speak. He looked around, seeing the surprise mirrored on many faces. Some smiled in approval, others frowned in doubt, but all eyes were fixed on him. Jack raised his hands quickly, shaking his head. Ma'am, I can't accept that. I didn't help you for any reward, let alone something like this. The old woman studied him calmly. You misunderstand. This is not payment. This is honor. I give my daughter only to a man I trust with her life. That is you. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Ayanna, who stood tall and unflinching. Her expression was calm, but there was strength in her gaze. She was not being forced. She seemed to stand there by her own choice. Still, the weight of the moment made Jack uneasy. Ma'am, he said gently, I respect you and your people, but I don't think it's right to take her hand just because I did one decent thing. Ayanna deserves more than that. Before the old woman could answer, Ayanna spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. You think I have no choice? You are wrong. I stand here because I wish to. I have seen how men in town look at us, how they laugh at you for helping. But you did not care. You showed courage and kindness. That is rare. Jack met her eyes, surprised by her boldness. She didn't look away, and in her steady gaze he saw not just beauty but determination. The old woman placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You see, she is not a prize to be given. She is a woman with her own will. She chooses this path as much as I do. Jack's thoughts swirled. He had never expected such an offer, never dreamed of it. He admired Ayanna's courage, but his sense of humility held him back. I don't want to disrespect your customs, he said slowly, but I don't want to take a step that feels wrong. Marriage, that's no small thing. It should be built on more than honor. It should be built on trust and love. The old woman nodded thoughtfully. Wise words. You do not rush. That too shows strength. The camp was silent, waiting. Jack could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. Finally, he stood and bowed his head slightly. I am honored, he said, truly. But if there is a future for me and Ayanna, it must come naturally. Not as a reward, but as a choice we both make freely in time. Ayanna's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then we shall see what time brings. The old woman raised her hand, silencing the murmurs. So it shall be. No reward forced, no path demanded. But know this, Jack, you have already taken the first step. My daughter sees you with respect. My people see you with respect. You must now see yourself the same way. Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest. For once, he wasn't ashamed of his actions. He wasn't worried about the sneers waiting for him back in town. For the first time, he felt that perhaps he had found a place where his true character was seen for what it was. As the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, Jack sat among the Apache people with a sense of peace he had never known. The offer had shocked him, humbled him, and unsettled him, but it had also opened a door he hadn't expected, a door to a future where respect, trust, and maybe even love could grow. The next morning, the camp was already alive with activity when Jack rose from where he had slept near the fire. The sound of children laughing, the smell of wood smoke, and the sight of the rising sun painted the camp with warmth. He stretched, still replaying the events of the night before in his mind. The old woman's offer, Ayanna's bold words, and the acceptance he felt from the people, it all seemed like a dream, yet it was real. Too real for him to ignore. When Jack mounted his horse to return to town, many of the Apache men gave him nods of acknowledgement. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was a start. Ayana stood nearby with her mother. Her dark eyes followed Jack as he prepared to leave. She gave him a small smile, not shy, but steady, as though she understood he had more battles waiting for him beyond the hills. Jack touched the brim of his hat respectfully before riding off. The road back to town felt longer than before. He knew whispers would spread quickly. Someone in town was bound to hear that he had spent another evening at the Apache camp, and the rumors would grow wilder by the hour. Still, he kept his shoulders straight, determined not to let fear control him. As soon as he arrived, his fears proved true. The moment he tied up his horse outside the blacksmith shop, 2 ranch hands walked past, smirking. "Look who's back," one said. "Spent the night with the savages, did you?" "Careful," the other added with a chuckle. "He might be one of them now." Jack ignored the taunts, but as he entered the saloon later, the mocking only grew worse. A group of cowboys at a table raised their glasses toward him, grinning. "To Jack," one shouted, "the bravest basket carrier in the West." The saloon erupted in laughter. The bartender shook his head and muttered, "You're really testing folks' patience, son." Jack's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He could fight them, but that would only prove their point. Instead, he walked to a corner table and sat alone. He sipped his drink quietly, keeping his gaze low, but the laughter didn't fade, it grew louder. Finally, one of the cowboys stood, swaggered over, and leaned across Jack's table. "Tell me, Jack," he sneered, "that old squaw give you her daughter yet? Heard she's the prettiest one they've got." Jack froze. The words cut deeper than any insult before. He stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. The saloon grew silent. "I won't let you speak that way about her," Jack said evenly, his voice hard as iron. "Not her, not her people." The cowboy blinked, then laughed nervously. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Jack replied. His eyes locked on the man's until the laughter around the room faltered. The cowboy backed away, muttering under his breath, but he didn't push further. Jack sat again, his heart pounding. He had made a choice. From that moment forward, he would no longer care about winning their approval. Days turned into weeks. Jack continued working at the ranch, but he spent more and more time at the Apache camp. He learned their ways, listened to their elders, and even practiced their language. He rode with the young men to hunt, shared meals with the families, and helped repair lodges. Slowly, their suspicion gave way to respect. Most of all, he spent time with Ayana. At first, their conversations were simple, sharing stories about their days, laughing at small things, learning about each other's worlds. But soon, Jack began to realize how strong and intelligent she was. She could ride as well as any cowboy. She knew the land better than anyone. And she carried herself with a grace that made her stand apart. Ayana, in turn, admired Jack's quiet strength. He was not boastful, not loud like the men in town. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried weight. She saw in him a man who chose honor over pride, even when it cost him everything. Back in town, the gossip never stopped. But gradually, something strange happened. The more Jack held his head high, the less power the whispers had. People began to notice his calm confidence, the way he walked into the saloon without flinching, the way he ignored insults without losing his temper. One afternoon, Mr. Dawson, the ranch owner, called him aside. "Jack," he said sternly, "you've been the talk of the town. Men say you're too close to the Apache. They say you've shamed the ranch." Jack looked him in the eye. "With respect, sir, I don't believe helping someone in need brings shame. I'll keep doing my work here, but I won't apologize for what I've done." Dawson studied him for a long moment. Finally, the old man sighed. "You're stubborn, but you're also one of the best hands I've got. Do what you will, but know that the town may never see you the same way." "I'm fine with that," Jack replied simply. Weeks later, everything changed. Jack rode into town one morning with Ayana walking proudly beside him. Her mother had encouraged her to visit, saying it was time the townsfolk saw her not as a shadow in the hills, but as a woman of dignity. The sight stunned the town. Conversations halted. People froze on the boardwalks, eyes wide with disbelief. Some whispered, some scowled, but no one laughed. Jack and Ayanna walked side by side, their steps firm, their heads held high. Inside the saloon, silence fell as they entered. The same men who once mocked Jack now sat quietly, their jeers caught in their throats. Jack met their eyes one by one, his expression calm but unyielding. For the first time they saw not weakness in him but strength, not shame, but pride. He led Ayanna to a table and together they sat, unshaken by the stares. The bartender, hesitant at first, poured 2 drinks and set them down without a word. Slowly, the whispers faded. The mocking laughter was gone. People no longer dared to challenge him because Jack had shown something none of them could deny: courage, honor, and respect that stood taller than their shallow pride. From that day forward, Jack was no longer known as the cowboy who humiliated himself for helping an old woman. He was the man who earned the respect of 2 worlds, the town that once scorned him, and the Apache people who now accepted him as one of their own. The old woman watched all this with quiet satisfaction. She had seen his true character long before anyone else, and she knew her daughter had chosen wisely. Jack, for his part, no longer cared about the town's approval. He had found something greater: dignity, respect, and the beginnings of love. And as he sat beside Ayanna, her hand resting lightly in his, he knew his journey was only beginning.